For Amelia Russo, an $89.54 act of compassion was a declaration of financial bankruptcy. She knew it the second she tapped her card. The cost of a stranger's steak dinner was her last gallon of gas, her share of the electric bill, and any hope of a decent meal for the rest of the week. She thought she was just saving an old man from a moment of public shame. She had no idea that by morning, this single, desperate gesture would ignite a deceased billionaire's final, venomous test, pitting her against a dynasty of predators and placing a strange, antique key in her hand. But this key wasn't for a simple door. It was the key to a 50-year-old secret, a priceless hidden treasure, and a war she was completely unprepared to fight. The Wednesday night shift at The Gilded Spoon was a special circle of hell reserved for the terminally exhausted. The air, thick with the smell of stale coffee and frying onions, hummed with the discordant symphony of clattering silverware, the hiss of the grill, and the low murmur of conversations Amelia was paid to interrupt. At 24, she felt 104. Her life was a spreadsheet bleeding red. The ghost of an art history degree from NYU, abandoned after her grandmother's stroke, haunted her in the form of a $52,000 student loan statement that arrived with mocking punctuality each month. Her car, a 2009 Toyota with a death rattle in its engine, was one cold morning away from becoming a permanent lawn ornament outside her cramped Queens apartment. She was $30 short on rent, and tonight's tips were not a bonus. They were a lifeline. "Russo, table 5 needs a check, and the couple at table 9 are complaining the soup is cold. Again," barked her manager, Sal, a man whose personality had been pickled in decades of customer complaints. "On it," Amelia mumbled, her smile a thin, brittle mask she put on with her apron. Table 9 was a recurring nightmare, but Amelia's gaze, as it often did, drifted to the small booth in the corner. Booth 4, her regular. He was a whisper from a bygone era, a man who seemed to carry his own pocket of silence into the diner's chaos. He came in every Wednesday and Friday, sat in booth 4, and ordered the same meal, a cup of black coffee and a bowl of tomato soup with extra crackers. He wore a tweed jacket, impeccably clean but frayed at the cuffs, and his hands, though spotted with age, were long and elegant. The loyalty card he'd once filled out but never used named him Silas Croft. He was quiet, unfailingly polite, and radiated a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical presence, an invisible cloak that resonated with the hollow space in Amelia's own chest. Tonight, however, was different. When Amelia approached with the coffee pot, he looked up from his usual contemplation of the salt shaker and spoke in a voice that was dry and soft like old paper. "Excuse me, miss. I think tonight I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare." Amelia blinked, the coffee pot hovering. The filet mignon, with its accompanying asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes, was $68. It was the most expensive thing on the menu. "Of course, Mr. Croft. And to drink? Just the coffee?" A small, sad smile touched the corners of his mouth. "No," he said. "I believe I'll have a glass of the Chateau Margaux." Her professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She knew that wine. She'd written a paper on the 1982 vintage. The Gilded Spoon, in a bizarre attempt at gentrification, had a few ridiculously overpriced bottles on its menu. The Chateau Margaux was $250 a bottle, a price so ludicrous Sal kept the single bottle in his office. A glass was $50. With his soup appetizer, his bill was already rocketing past $100. Maybe he'd won the lottery. Maybe it was his birthday. A strange, vicarious warmth spread through her. "An excellent choice, sir," she said, her voice regaining its professional cheer. An hour later, The dinner rush had thinned to a trickle. Mr. Croft sat back, his plate wiped clean. He had eaten with a slow, deliberate reverence, as if each bite was a memory. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, signalling for the check. Amelia printed the slip. With tax, the total came to 139 Horst bottles and 54. She placed it discreetly on his table. "Whenever you're ready, sir." A few minutes later, she saw him take out a thin, worn leather wallet. He produced a standard-issue blue credit card. She returned with the portable machine. He inserted the card. A shrill, damning series of beeps echoed in the quiet diner. Declined. Amelia's stomach plummeted. Mr. Croft's face, already pale and lined, seemed to lose all its remaining colour. A fine tremor started in his hands. "Oh," he whispered, his voice a fragile thread of sound. That can't be. There must be a mistake. Could you try it again?" Feeling Sal's laser-like stare from behind the counter, Amelia ran the card again. The same series of high-pitched beeps. Declined. "My word," Mr. Croft stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route. He was drowning in humiliation. He began a frantic, fluttering search of his coat pockets. "I don't understand. I was certain—" "Hey, Russo!" Sal's voice boomed across the room. "Problem over there?" The remaining patrons swiveled in their seats. Mr. Croft's private agony was now a public spectacle. He looked like a trapped bird, his dignity shattering like thin glass. In that moment, Amelia felt a surge of white-hot fury, not at him, but at the world, at the cruel math of money that could strip a good man of his composure over a piece of meat and a glass of wine. She thought of the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She thought of the $30 she still needed for rent. She thought of Mr. Croft's terrified, watery grey eyes. "No problem, Sal," she called back, her voice sharp with a confidence she didn't feel. "Machine's just being fussy." She turned to Mr. Croft, leaning in close, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Don't you worry about a thing." She pulled her own worn wallet from her apron pocket, the one held together with duct tape. She slipped out her debit card. "Miss, no, I couldn't possibly," he protested, his voice thick with shame. "Mr. Croft," she said, her eyes fixed on the card reader as she tapped her card against it. "Consider it a Gilded Spoon VIP bonus for our most loyal customer." The machine beeped once. Approved. She printed the receipt, tore off the customer copy, and slid her own back into her apron. "You're all set, sir," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "Have a wonderful evening." Mr. Croft didn't speak. He simply stared at her, his gaze intense and searching. For 10 solid seconds, he looked at her, truly saw her. The sadness in his eyes was a deep well, but in their depths, something else flickered. Not just gratitude, but something heavier. Recognition. He gave a single, sharp nod, a gesture of profound, old-world dignity. He rose slowly from the booth, straightened his tweed jacket, and walked out of the diner without a backward glance. Amelia sagged against the counter, her legs feeling like jelly. The 139.54 debit was a physical blow. She was no longer just broke. She was in a hole so deep she couldn't see the top. "What was that VIP crap?" Sal grumbled, stomping over. The card reader was glitching. Amelia lied, her voice smooth as silk. "I comped it. Like I said, loyalty." Sal narrowed his eyes. $140, Russo. That's a week's worth of soup. That's coming out of your check." "Fine," she snapped, turning away. "It's handled." She fled to the restroom and splashed cold water on her face. She had just performed financial seppuku to preserve a stranger's pride. Staring at her own tired, pale reflection in the cracked mirror, a single thought echoed in her mind. That was the single dumbest thing I have ever done. The next morning, Thursday, arrived grey and drizzling, a perfect match for Amelia's mood. Her apartment was cold, the silence broken only by the gurgle of an ancient radiator. She woke with a familiar knot of financial dread in her stomach. Her bank account now read a pathetic $7.12. She'd have to beg her cousin for a loan, a humiliation she loathed. She made a cup of instant coffee, using the last of the powder, and sat at her wobbly kitchen table, staring at the pink eviction notice. The kindness she'd felt last night now seemed like an act of reckless insanity. Her next shift wasn't until 4 p.m. She was calculating how many plasma donations it would take to cover her rent when a sharp, authoritative knock sounded on her door. It wasn't the landlord's lazy rap or a neighbor's frantic pounding. This was different. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a man who didn't belong in her building's dingy hallway. He wasn't just wearing a suit. The suit was wearing him. It was a tailored masterpiece of charcoal wool that probably cost more than her car. His hair was silver at the temples. His face was a study in stern lines, and he held a briefcase of gleaming black leather. She opened the door, the security chain still latched. "Can I help you?" The man's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, took in her worn-out sweatshirt and tired face. "Are you Miss Amelia Russo?" His voice was a low baritone, clipped and precise, the product of expensive schools and powerful boardrooms. "Yes. Who's asking?" "My name is Elias Vance. I'm an attorney with Sterling, Vance and Locke. I must have a moment of your time. It is a matter of extreme urgency and importance." Amelia's blood turned to ice. Sterling, Vance, and Locke. She'd seen their name in the financial pages. They didn't represent waitresses. They represented gods of finance. She was being sued. The restaurant was suing her for the comped meal. Or worse, Mr. Croft was some kind of elaborate con artist, and she was on the hook for something terrible. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice a thin whisper. Mr. Vance's expression remained impassive. "It concerns a financial transaction that occurred last night at the Gilded Spoon Diner." Oh God, she was going to be sick. "It involves a Mr. Silas Croft," Vance continued. Amelia's mind raced. "Look, I paid his bill. It was a gift. I don't want the money back, if that's what this is about." "Mr. Croft is not my client," Vance clarified, his tone sharp. "May I come in?" Numbly, she slid the chain off and opened the door. He stepped inside, and his presence seemed to shrink her small apartment, making the second-hand furniture look even more pathetic. He remained standing, a granite statue in the center of her worn linoleum floor. "Ms. Russo," he began, "I am here to inform you that Mr. Silas Croft passed away peacefully in his sleep late last night." Amelia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What? No!" "He was fine. He had a stake." "He was 91 years old and had a long-standing heart condition," Vance stated, with the detached air of a man delivering a weather forecast. His passing was not unexpected. He was a man of simple means, and, by all accounts, no living relatives. "That's awful," Amelia whispered, sinking onto her lumpy couch. The image of his sad, grateful eyes flashed in her mind. He had eaten his last meal alone, and she had paid for it. A wave of profound, unexpected sorrow washed over her. "Indeed," Vance said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I am not, as you might assume, Mr. Croft's attorney. I am, in fact, the sole executor of the estate of his brother." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. Mr. Sterling Croft, the industrialist. Amelia had heard of him. Everyone had. Sterling Croft was a phantom, a reclusive billionaire who owned a staggering portfolio of art, real estate, and technology firms. He was a local legend who had died 2 months ago. "What does any of this have to do with me?" she asked, her head spinning. Sterling Croft's last will and testament was unconventional, Vance said, clicking open his briefcase. He and his brother Silas were estranged for nearly 50 years. A bitter family feud. Sterling, however, never stopped watching over his brother from a great distance. He knew Silas was fiercely proud, and he knew he was living on a meager pension. He withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a heavy black wax C. Sterling created a very specific, very unusual codicil to his will. He believed his own 2 children were, in his words, moral and intellectual vacuums. He structured his entire $2 billion estate around a final test. Amelia stared, unblinking. This couldn't be real. The bulk of his estate was placed into a blind trust. I, as executor, was instructed to monitor Silas's financial activities. The declined credit card last night was not an accident, Ms. Russo. It was a tripwire. The account was deliberately maintained with a 0 balance. It was an alert system designed by Sterling himself. He placed the envelope on her coffee table. Sterling's codicil stipulated that the key to his entire legacy was to be given to the first person who demonstrated a significant act of selfless generosity towards his brother, with no expectation of reward or recognition. By paying his 139 out of 54 bill, you, Ms. Russo, were the first and only person to pass my client's test. Amelia couldn't form words. Her throat was closed. "You don't have to understand it now," Vance said. "My legal obligation, as per my client's very explicit instructions, is now fulfilled." He placed a heavy, linen business card next to the envelope. "Inside that envelope, you will find a key and an address. What you do with them is your decision. I will, however, strongly advise you to contact me before taking any action. This situation is about to become exceedingly complex." "Complex how?" she finally managed to ask. A new, harder glint entered Elias Vance's eyes. Sterling Croft's children, Alistair and Beatrice Croft, were all but disinherited. They are pathologically litigious and profoundly unpleasant people. They are not yet aware of this codicil, or of you. That will change very soon. He nodded once. "Good day, Miss Russo." He turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Amelia alone in the sudden, roaring silence, staring at an envelope that felt heavier than the entire city. Amelia sat for what felt like an eternity, her coffee cold, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was a joke, a sick, elaborate prank for some hidden camera show. But the business card was real, the embossed logo of Sterling, Vance, and Locke sharp and unforgiving under her trembling fingers. She broke the wax seal. Inside, just as he'd said, were 2 items. The first was a key. It was heavy, made of ornate, tarnished brass, with a complex skeleton-style bit unlike any modern key she had ever seen. The second was a single sheet of heavy parchment. Typed on it was an address, the Abernathy Building, 17 Sutton Place, Penthouse A, Sutton Place. The name itself was synonymous with old money and unimaginable wealth. She called the only person on earth she trusted implicitly. "Lena, you are not going to believe this." Lena Petrova, her former art history classmate and steadfast friend, was at her door in 30 minutes, armed with a box of bodega donuts and a healthy dose of Russian cynicism. Amelia laid out the whole story. Mr. Croft, the filet mignon, the declined card, the lawyer, the key. "Mila, honey." "No," Lena said, dusting powdered sugar from her black jeans. This is a trap. This is how you end up in a ditch. Or worse, this is some insane scam. You'll go to this penthouse, and they'll have you arrested for trespassing. He was from Sterling, Vance, and Locke, Lena. He gave me his card. Lena pulled out her phone and Googled the name. Elias Vance? Oh, damn, he's real. Very real. Head of estate law. Specializes in contentious successions. Okay. She looked up, her dark eyes wide. Okay, so it's not a prank, which means it's real, which is 1,000 times more terrifying. What do I do? Amelia whispered. You go, obviously, Lena said, already grabbing her coat. And I am coming with you. I've watched enough true crime documentaries to know you don't go meet a mysterious billionaire's ghost alone. Let's go. We'll take the subway. Your car sounds like it's gargling rocks. The Abernathy was a pre-war limestone behemoth, a silent monument to Gilded Age fortunes overlooking the East River. The lobby was a hushed cathedral of marble and mahogany, manned by a doorman who looked at their jeans and sneakers with quiet disdain. We're here for Penthouse A, Amelia said, her voice surprisingly steady. The doorman raised a skeptical eyebrow, but a quick call on his desk phone made his eyes widen. Of course, ma'am. The private elevator is this way. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. The moment the doors slid open, they were met with a wall of silence and the faint, dusty scent of a place sealed off from time. The apartment was a cavernous space, but it was not the gleaming, modern penthouse of a tech billionaire. It was a museum. The walls were lined with towering mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. The furniture, heavy carved chairs and velvet-draped sofas, was shrouded in white dust cloths, creating a landscape of ghostly shapes. But it was what was on the walls that made Amelia's breath catch in her throat. Between the bookshelves hung paintings, dozens of them, covered by the same white cloths. Who lived here? Lena whispered, her voice echoing in the vast room. I think Sterling Croft did, Amelia said. She moved through the space, her sneakers silent on the thick Persian rugs. Against the far wall, overlooking a panoramic view of the city, was a massive, ornately carved desk. Unlike the rest of the room, the desk was free of dust. On its polished surface sat two items, a thick, leather-bound ledger, and another cream-colored envelope, identical to the first. This one, however, was addressed in a strong, angry script. To the person of character. Amelia's heart hammered. That was supposed to be her. With unsteady hands, she opened the envelope. The letter inside was from Sterling Croft, dated the week before his death. To the individual who now stands in my study. If you are reading this, it means two things. First, my brother Silas is gone. I hope his end was peaceful. Second, you have performed an act of selfless decency for him, something my own issue proved incapable of their entire parasitic lives. You have, by your actions, become the unwilling executor of my final wish. For 50 years, my brother and I were separated by pride and foolishness. I built an empire of things. He lived a life of quiet want. I regret that divide more than any failed business deal. I watched him from a distance, knowing his pride would never allow him to accept my charity. At the same time, I watched my own children, Alistair and Beatrice, circle me like vultures, their eyes fixed not on me, but on their inheritance. They are hollow. They bear my name, but possess none of the grit or integrity upon which it was built. My official will, the one they are currently fighting in court, leaves them each $1 for the sum total of the love they have shown me. They will claim I was senile. They are wrong. I have never been more lucid. The entirety of my liquid assets, some $2 billion, has been placed into the Croft Foundation for Arts and Antiquities. But the Foundation's true treasure is not its endowment. It is this collection. The paintings in this room, the sculptures, the rare books. They are my life's work. It is one of the most significant private collections of Renaissance and Baroque art in the world, and it is in danger. My children see this art not as a cultural trust, but as a commodity to be carved up and sold off to fund their vapid lifestyles. They will not have it. This key, this letter, and the ledger on this desk are your proof. You, stranger, are now the sole director of the Croft Foundation and the legal guardian of this collection. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, has the paperwork. He was instructed to await your contact. He is loyal to me, but he is a cynic. You will have to earn his trust. This is not a gift. It is a responsibility of staggering weight. My children will find you. They will not see you as a person. They will see you as an obstacle. They will try to crush you. Do not let them. The ledger contains the ammunition you will need. Use it wisely. Sincerely, Sterling Croft. Amelia sank into the leather chair behind the desk, the letter shaking in her hand. Lena read it over her shoulder, her mouth agape. $2 billion? Myla, you're not a waitress anymore. You're the guardian of a secret museum. He left me a war, Amelia whispered, her mind reeling. My children will find you. Her eyes fell on the leather ledger. It was Silas's. She recognized the spidery handwriting from the loyalty card. Her fingers, coated in the dust of the past, opened it. It wasn't a diary of loneliness. It was a meticulous record. For years, Silas had been acting as Sterling's secret agent. The pages were filled with notes on Alistair's shady business dealings, Beatrice's social climbing schemes, and their conversations about their father, all overheard and dutifully recorded. Then she found the final entry, dated the night before. Wednesday. He ordered the 82 Margot, a private joke between us, the last bottle we shared before the fight, a signal that the end was near. The girl paid. Amelia. Looked like she was choosing between my dignity and her own dinner. She chose mine. She has a good heart. But I saw her eyes when she looked at the wine list. She recognized the name. She has knowledge. Sterling would like that. She's the one. A tear traced a clean path through the dust on Amelia's cheek. The 139.54 wasn't just a test of kindness, it was a test of discernment. It was then that they heard it. The sound of the private elevator ascending. A soft ding echoed through the silent penthouse. The elevator doors slid open. I don't understand how a squatter could have gotten past the doorman. A man's voice, smooth and venomous, dripped into the room. I told you we should have had the locks changed the day the old man croaked. Just get this over with, Alistair, a woman's sharp, impatient voice replied. Find the provenance documents for the Caravaggio, so we can have our own appraisal done before the probate hearing. Two figures stepped into the room. They were walking advertisements for inherited wealth. The man, Alistair Croft, was tall and handsome in a predatory way, dressed in a suit so sharp it could cut glass. The woman, Beatrice, was rail-thin and elegant, her blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon, her face a mask of bored disdain. They stopped dead when they saw Amelia sitting behind their father's desk, and Lena standing beside her, holding a heavy bronze statuette like a club. Beatrice's eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Amelia's worn jeans and faded hoodie. "Who?" she said, her voice laced with the quiet fury of a queen who has just found a peasant in her throne room. "In God's name, are you?" Amelia stood up, surprised by the steadiness that flowed into her limbs. "I'm Amelia Russo," she said, "and I believe you're trespassing." Alistair let out a short, incredulous laugh. Trespassing. Darling, we own this building. The better question is, how did the help get in? I was given a key, Amelia said, holding up the ornate brass key. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Recognition and then alarm flashed across her face. Where did you get that? It was delivered to me this morning, Amelia said, by Elias Vance. The colour drained from Alistair's face. Beatrice's mask of cool superiority cracked, revealing raw panic. They exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated horror. Vance? Alistair repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Why would our father's lawyer be giving keys to a what are you exactly? The caterer? I'm a waitress, Amelia said, lifting her chin. And I'm the new director of the Croft Foundation. For a moment, there was only the sound of the city humming far below. Then, Beatrice threw her head back and let out a laugh, a high, brittle, ugly sound. Director? You. That's priceless. The foundation was a senile fantasy. It's being dissolved. The will is being contested. Our father was losing his mind. He wasn't, Amelia said, her hand resting on Silas's ledger. He was meticulous, and he knew exactly who you were. Alistair's gaze locked onto the ledger. What is that? What's in your hand? He took a step forward. That is the property of the Croft estate. Give it to me. No, Amelia said, pulling it closer. Lena moved to stand slightly in front of her. This is a private family matter, Beatrice hissed, her eyes like chips of ice. You two have wandered into the deep end of a very large, very cold pool. You need to leave. Now. We understand your father wrote you out of his will, Lena retorted. We read the letter. The letter? Alistair roared. He lunged forward, shoving Lena aside and grabbing Amelia's arm. His grip was like a vice. You little thief! You broke in here and ransacked our father's private study. I didn't steal anything, Amelia cried, struggling against his grip. You're a grifter, Beatrice said, her voice a terrifyingly calm whisper. You targeted our uncle, our poor, sick Uncle Silas. We were just about to bring him back into the family, to care for him. And now we find some little gold digger has sunk her claws into him. What did you do? Seduce him? I bought him dinner, Amelia yelled, the sheer injustice of the accusation making her see red. His card was declined. He was alone. I paid for his meal because I felt sorry for him. I didn't even know who he was. A likely story, Alistair sneered, releasing her arm and wiping his hand on his trousers as if she had contaminated him. You're a nobody from Queens. You have no comprehension of the power we wield, the worlds we can move. Beatrice stepped close, invading Amelia's personal space, her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. So here is what is going to happen, she purred. You are going to give us that key. You are going to give us that ledger. And you are going to crawl back to whatever hovel you came from and forget any of this ever happened. Alistair pulled out a slim, platinum money clip. He peeled off a thick stack of $100 bills. Here's $20,000, a nice little severance package. Go pay off your student loans, buy a new car, and disappear. He tossed the stack of cash onto the desk. This is your one and only offer. Take it, or we will not just ruin you. We will erase you. Amelia looked at the money. It was a fortune. It was a new life. It was an escape hatch from the crushing weight of her existence. It was the smart choice. She looked at Beatrice's smug, cruel face. She thought of Mr. Croft's sad, kind eyes. She thought of his last words in the ledger. She's the one. Amelia looked Beatrice dead in the eye. No. The smile evaporated from Beatrice's face. What did you say? No, Amelia repeated, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. I'm not giving you anything. This apartment, this collection, this ledger, they were entrusted to me. You are the ones who are trespassing, so I suggest you get out." Alistair's face turned a blotchy, furious red. "You will regret this for the rest of your short, miserable life." "We'll see you in court," Beatrice said, her voice flat and cold as a tombstone. "We'll bury you in legal fees. We will claim undue influence, fraud, elder abuse. I will have my investigators dig into every corner of your life until they find a secret so dirty it will make you unemployable. You will be a pariah. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact." She turned on her heel. "You've made your choice, Waitress. I truly hope it was worth it." Alistair gave Amelia one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred, then followed his sister into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and Amelia and Lena were left alone in the silent, dusty museum, with $20,000 lying on the desk like a coiled snake. The next 48 hours were a descent into a nightmare. On Elias Vance's stark advice, "They found you. I assumed they would. Do not go back to your apartment. Do not go to work." Amelia and Lena holed up in Lena's tiny studio, subsisting on coffee and adrenaline. "They threatened me, Mr. Vance," Amelia said over the phone, her voice trembling. "They will do more than threaten," Vance's voice replied, grim and devoid of comfort. "They have already filed an emergency injunction to freeze the Foundation's assets and a motion to have you removed as director. The claim is testamentary incapacity on Sterling's part and a conspiracy of fraud and elder abuse on yours. They are painting you as a predator who stalked and manipulated a vulnerable old man for months. But that's a lie. Truth is a luxury in these matters, Miss Russo. The version that prevails is the one backed by the most money and the least conscience. Sterling anticipated this. He left behind resources. But this will be a war of attrition. They intend to bleed you dry, mentally and financially. Are you prepared for that? Amelia looked at Silas's ledger, sitting on Lena's coffee table. "Yes," she said. "Good," Vance replied, "because the first shots have already been fired." The assault was swift and brutal. On Monday, Amelia received a call from Sal. He was sputtering, barely coherent. "I just got a call from a lawyer and the health department. Something about you, a criminal investigation. I don't know what you did, Russo, but you're fired. Don't even come in for your last check." The next day, a sleazy article appeared on a notorious city gossip blog. "Waitress scammer targets billionaire fortune," the headline screamed. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, quoting anonymous friends of the Croft family who described Amelia as a calculating opportunist, known for preying on elderly men. It mentioned her student debt and her precarious financial situation as proof of her desperation. Her face, an unflattering photo taken from an old social media profile, was plastered across the page. Her landlord served her a formal eviction notice 2 days later, citing a clause about behavior that brings the property into disrepute. The Crofts were not just attacking her, they were systematically dismantling her life, brick by brick. She was jobless, soon to be homeless, and her name was being dragged through the mud. "This is insane," Lena said, pacing her small apartment. "They're trying to break you, Mila. They want you to be so terrified and so broke that you have no choice but to surrender." That evening, Elias Vance called again. "The Crofts have made a formal settlement offer through their attorneys," he said, his voice weary. $5 million, tax-free. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, turn over the key and the ledger, and walk away from the directorship. Amelia was silent. "Take it, Mila," Lena pleaded, her eyes filled with genuine fear for her friend. "Please, $5 million. You can disappear. Go back to school. Buy a brownstone. You can be safe. These people are monsters. This isn't your fight." The $5 million was not a life raft. It was a luxury yacht. It was safety, security, and freedom. It was the sane choice. She picked up Silas's ledger. Her archival training, the part of her brain that saw patterns and connections, had noticed something strange in the last few pages. Among the notes on Alistair's debts and Beatrice's social functions were a series of seemingly random numbers and letters. It looked like gibberish. MA-2, C12, P17, R16, V44, S9. She thought about the $5 million offer was not a proposition. It was a weight. It settled in the air of Lena's cramped studio, a tangible presence that smelled of ozone and scorched earth, the scent of a life burned to the ground to make way for a new, sterile paradise. It was safety. It was the end of the gnawing dread that had been her constant companion for years. It was the art history degree she'd never finished, a small, sunlit apartment that didn't smell of damp, a car that didn't sound like a dying animal. It was everything she had ever wanted. "Mila, for the love of God, take it," Lena whispered, her voice raw with a fear that was purely for her friend. "This isn't a movie. There's no heroic third act. There is only what they will do to you. They will grind you into dust and salt the earth where you stood. $5 million is not a settlement. It's an escape pod." Amelia looked down at the ledger in her lap. Its leather was cool and smooth beneath her trembling fingers. In the week since she had first opened it in that ghostly penthouse, she had come to know its secrets. Not the secrets of Alistair's malfeasance or Beatrice's cruelty, but the quieter secrets of the man who had written in it. She knew the way his T's slanted when he was tired, the way his ink bled slightly when he wrote of the past. She had traced the faint, ghostly imprints of prior pages, feeling the pressure of his hand across a 50-year divide. He wasn't just a character in a billionaire's test anymore. He was Silas, a man of quiet dignity and profound loneliness who had spent his last years as the secret sentinel of a legacy he could never inherit. The money was an erasure. It was the price for agreeing that Silas's life, his loyalty, his final judgment of her character, meant nothing. It was the price for letting Sterling's last, desperate attempt to protect his life's true meaning be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old man. It was the price for letting Beatrice and Alistair win. Her eyes fell again on the cryptic strings of letters and numbers that dotted the final pages. M82, C12, P17, R16, V or S9. They were a discordant note in the sad, meticulous symphony of Silas's observations. Her mind, starved of sleep and fueled by cheap coffee and adrenaline, kept snagging on them. They felt like a lock, and she was certain that if she could only find the key, the entire war would pivot on its hinge. "They think I'm a pawn," Amelia said, her voice barely a whisper. She wasn't speaking to Lena anymore. She was speaking to the ghosts in the room. "They think I'm just a piece of grit in their oyster, something to be coated in money and spit out." She stood up and began to pace the small space, the ledger clutched to her chest like a shield. But Sterling didn't choose a pawn. He didn't choose a lawyer or a banker or an art world insider. He set a test for a person, for character. And Silas confirmed it. She stopped, her gaze fixed on a crack in the plaster wall. Her abandoned education, the years spent in dusty libraries deciphering the iconography of Renaissance masters, suddenly sparked to life within her. It wasn't a useless, expensive ghost anymore. It was a muscle she hadn't used in years. M82, she murmured. Margot 1982. The wine. The signal. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. It wasn't just a signal that the end was near. It was the key. The key to the code. Lena, what if it's not just a diary? What if it's a catalogue? Lena stared at her, uncomprehending. A what? An inventory. A secret one. Amelia's mind was racing now, connections firing like synapses in a storm. C12, P17, R16, V4, S9. It's a cataloguing system. Artist, year, location. R, Rembrandt. V, Vermeer. C, Caravaggio. She rushed to Lena's laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up the known inventory of Sterling Croft's collection. Her breath caught in her throat. There it was. A Rembrandt, painted in 1634. A Vermeer. A Caravaggio from his 12th year in Rome. It all fit. S9, she breathed. P17, it's the location. Storage Unit 9. Penthouse, Wall 17. He was moving them. Sterling was moving the real paintings. He was replacing his own collection with forgeries, and his brother, the quiet man in the diner, was the only one keeping the master list. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it filled her with a terrible, vibrant energy. This was the ammunition Sterling had written about. Not just the gossip and financial records, but the ultimate checkmate. The Crofts were fighting for a collection that wasn't even there. She picked up her phone and dialed Elias Vance. Her hand was perfectly steady. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and cold as a winter morning. "It's Amelia Russo. Please inform the Croft attorneys that we reject their offer. We reject it in its entirety, and tell them I look forward to seeing them at the deposition." The deposition was held not in a courtroom, but in the sterile, soundproofed conference room of a neutral law firm. It was a glass and steel box 20 floors above the city, designed for bloodless corporate warfare. Beatrice Croft sat across the long mahogany table, a vision of expensive, predatory grace. She didn't look at Amelia with hatred. That would have been too honest, too human. She looked at her with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a microbe under a slide just before adding the drop of acid that will dissolve it. Alistair was absent, his lawyers claiming a sudden illness, though Vance had dryly noted it was more likely a sudden attack of cowardice. Beatrice's lead counsel, Marcus Thorne, a man whose silver hair and grandfatherly smile concealed the soul of a barracuda, began the proceedings. For 3 hours, he subjected Amelia to a methodical, soul-flaying interrogation. He twisted her compassion for Silas into a calculated, long-term seduction. He painted her student debt not as a burden, but as a criminal motive. He entered into evidence the sleazy gossip blog articles, the notice of her firing, the eviction papers, each one a stone he used to build a prison of shame around her. "So, Ms. Russo," Thorne said, leaning forward, his voice a conspiratorial murmur, "you, a woman on the verge of financial ruin, just happened to develop a deep, platonic friendship with a lonely old man. And you had no idea, not the slightest inkling, that he was the brother of one of the wealthiest, most private art collectors on the planet." "I knew him as Mr. Croft from Booth 4, Amelia stated, her hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles were white. "He was my regular." "Your regular," Thorne repeated, savouring the word. "And on the night in question, this man, who for years had only ordered soup, suddenly decides to have the most expensive meal on the menu. A meal you then paid for, with what was, quite literally, the last of your money. Does that not strike you as rehearsed?" "It struck me as sad," Amelia replied, her voice low but firm. "It struck me as a man trying to have one last beautiful thing." Beatrice let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh of theatrical pity. "She's quite the actress, isn't she, Marcus?" Vance, who had been silent and still as a granite statue, finally spoke. "I would remind my esteemed colleague that my client is here to answer his questions, not to be subjected to the peanut gallery commentary of a disinherited heiress." Thorne's smile tightened. He produced a copy of the ledger. "Let's talk about this document, found so conveniently in the deceased's private study. You claim this is Silas Croft's diary." "I claim it is his ledger," Amelia corrected. "It contains his notes." "Including these notes," Thorne said, pointing to the coded entries. "Our experts suggest this is a rudimentary cipher, perhaps detailing bank accounts, access codes, a little something Silas was planning to share with his new protégé." This was the moment. Amelia looked at Elias Vance. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She had spent the last week closeted with him and a team of art experts he'd hired, the finest authenticators in the world, who had, under the authority of the Foundation, gained access to the penthouse. "It's not a cipher for bank accounts," Amelia said, her voice resonating with a newfound authority that made Thorne pause. "It's a provenance and location ledger. It's a record of Sterling Croft systematically moving his most valuable works of art out of his penthouse and replacing them with forgeries." The silence in the room was absolute. Beatrice's serene mask finally cracked. A flicker of genuine confusion, quickly followed by alarm, crossed her features. Thorne recovered first, letting out a booming, dismissive laugh. "That is the most ludicrous, desperate fantasy I have ever heard. You are accusing Sterling Croft of what? Stealing his own collection?" "Protecting it," Amelia said, her gaze locking with Beatrice's. "Protecting it from his own children, whom he knew would liquidate it the moment he was gone to fund. And I believe I'm quoting him directly. Their vapid lifestyles." Beatrice's face went pale. The composure she had worn like armor had shattered, revealing the raw, grasping avarice beneath. "You're lying. The collection is secure. Our appraisers have seen it." "Your appraisers saw what Sterling wanted them to see," Vance interjected smoothly, sliding a thick, bound report across the table. "This is the preliminary report from the Conservation Department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They examined 6 key pieces in the penthouse 2 days ago. The Caravaggio is a magnificent piece of work, painted in 2018 by a rather brilliant forger in Brussels. The Vermeer is even better. It almost fooled our team. The real paintings, along with 32 other masterworks, are currently in a climate-controlled art storage facility in Geneva, held under the sole legal authority of the Croft Foundation, as directed by its late founder. He let the words hang in the dead air. Thorne stared at the report as if it were a venomous snake. Beatrice looked from the report to Amelia, and in her eyes, Amelia saw the abyss. It wasn't just the shock of being outmaneuvered. It was the dawning horror of a predator realizing it had spent months, millions of dollars, and all of its energy hunting a ghost. They had been fighting for fakes. Beatrice stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "This deposition is over," she hissed. She didn't look at her lawyer. She looked only at Amelia. "You have not won," she said, her voice a low, sibilant promise. "You have simply chosen a more interesting way to be destroyed." She turned and swept out of the room, leaving a vortex of stunned silence in her wake. The court case, when it finally happened, was a formality, an anticlimax. The Met's report, combined with Sterling's video deposition, was an insurmountable wall of evidence. Thorne's arguments crumbled to dust. Alistair and Beatrice did not even appear. The judge, a woman with eyes that had seen every shade of human greed, dismissed their contest with extreme prejudice, her voice dripping with contempt. She affirmed Sterling's will, solidified Amelia's position as director, and, in a move of beautiful legal savagery, ordered the Crofts to personally reimburse the Foundation for all legal fees and to pay punitive damages for malicious prosecution. The war of headlines and injunctions was over. But Beatrice's whispered promise echoed in Amelia's mind. The destruction she had promised would be of a different kind. In the months that followed, Amelia learned the true nature of her new life. The Foundation provided her with a salary and a secure, unassuming apartment on the Upper West Side. It was clean, it was safe, and it was profoundly lonely. The penthouse, the collection of fakes, was sealed, pending a decision on its fate. She was the director of a $2 billion foundation, yet her days were filled with the quiet, unglamorous work of setting up board meetings, reviewing grant proposals, and learning the intricate language of endowments and tax law from a surprisingly patient Elias Vance. The world she had entered was not the world of galas and auctions she might have imagined. It was a world of hushed libraries, climate-controlled archives, and intense, passionate scholars who spoke of pottery shards and forgotten manuscripts with a reverence others reserved for gods. She was no longer a waitress, but she often felt like an imposter, a girl from Queens playing dress-up in a life that wasn't hers. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, weightless sense of dislocation. One rain-slicked Tuesday in November, Vance called her. "There is one final piece of the estate to be dealt with," he said. "Sterling's other collection. He left a specific set of instructions for you, for the director." He gave her an address in the Bronx and a simple, old-fashioned brass key. Not the ornate key to the penthouse, but something plain, functional. The address was not a gleaming storage facility, but a hulking, anonymous brick warehouse near the docks, a place that time and gentrification had forgotten. She went alone. The key opened a heavy steel door, and she stepped not into a vault, but into a vast, dusty cavern, filled with row upon row of simple wooden crates, stacked 20 feet high. The air smelled of old paper, dry rot, and forgotten time. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, dancing shadows. Tacked to the first stack of crates was a familiar cream-colored envelope. It simply said, "For the archivist." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Sterling's angry, forceful script filled the page. Director. The paintings were a beautiful lie, a decoy to distract the vultures. This is the truth. This is my life's real work, not the things I bought, but the things I saved from being thrown away. My father was a junk man. Before the steel mills, before the money, he collected scrap. He taught me that everything has a story, and nothing is ever truly worthless. While I was buying masterpieces to hang on my walls, I was also buying the things no one else wanted. The entire archives of bankrupt newspapers, the personal letters of forgotten poets, the glass plate negatives of anonymous photographers, the ledgers of businesses that have been dust for 100 years. A city's memory is not in its monuments, but in its trash. My children saw this as a madman's hoarding. I see it as a trust. The paintings are for the world. This is for the quiet ones, for the scholars, the students, the seekers, for the person who understands that the story of a city is told not by the victors, but by the receipts, the diaries, and the love letters left behind. The Foundation's first and most important task is not to acquire more art. It is to give this collection a voice, to build a home for it, to fund the quiet, patient work of the people who will spend their lives sifting through this beautiful, glorious mess. My brother Silas understood this. He knew the value of the overlooked. He would have been the perfect guardian for it. In his absence, he and I have chosen you. Do not let it remain silent." Amelia leaned against a stack of crates, the letter shaking in her hand. She looked out at the silent wooden metropolis of forgotten stories. This was the real treasure. Not $2 billion. Not a Vermeer. It was a staggering, overwhelming responsibility that felt more like home than anything she had ever known. She found a crowbar left against the wall and pried open the nearest crate. It was not filled with gold or jewels, but with bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. She picked one up. It was from a woman named Eleanor, writing in 1918 to her husband, a soldier in France. She wrote of the price of bread, of their son's first steps, of her fear and her unending love. Amelia sank to the dusty concrete floor, the letter in her hand, and began to weep. She wept for Silas and his quiet life. She wept for Sterling and his lonely crusade. She wept for Eleanor and a love trapped in amber a century ago. She wept for the exhausted, terrified girl who had tapped her debit card in a diner, an act of kindness that had unknowingly answered a question posed by a ghost 50 years earlier. Her inheritance was not a fortune to be spent. It was a silence to be filled. It was a library of whispers waiting for someone to listen. She took out her phone and called Elias Vance. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice thick with emotion but clear as a bell. "I found the real collection." "I expected you would," he replied, a note of something that sounded almost like pride in his voice. "What are your instructions?" Amelia looked around the vast, shadowed warehouse, at the endless sea of crates. A genuine smile, the first she had felt in months, bloomed on her face. It was not the brittle smile of a waitress, or the weary smile of a legal combatant. It was the smile of a woman who had finally, against all odds, found her life's work. "My instructions," she said, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Get me a desk, a lamp, and 1,000 acid-free archival boxes. And then, get me a team. We have a city to resurrect."